Imagine a moment when the world around you seems to be falling apart. The waves of life crash violently, and you feel as though you're about to be swallowed by the chaos. Now, picture a voice in the middle of that storm. A voice that doesn't just offer comfort, but boldly challenges the power of the circumstances around you. A voice that declares, God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. These words, taken from Psalm 46, are not just soothing, they are an anchor for those facing life's most intense storms. When we think of refuge, our minds might immediately conjure an image of protection, perhaps a castle, a fortress, or a safe haven. But the idea of God as a refuge goes far beyond walls of stone or places of physical safety. It is a promise of divine protection that transcends the material, offering emotional and spiritual security. No matter the size of the problem, this fortress cannot be penetrated, not even by the deepest despair. Imagine a space where no worry, fear, or external attack can reach you. That is the reality of God's refuge. Now consider fortress. A fortress isn't just a place to hide, it's a place of strength, a space for preparation where we are renewed to face what lies beyond its walls. God doesn't merely protect us within this fortress, He equips us to rise again, to fight with renewed vigor. Picture a weary soldier, shoulders slumped under the weight of past battles. When he finds a place to rest and recharge, something changes. He doesn't just rest, he becomes stronger. That's the kind of renewal God promises. He isn't a distant observer. He is active, present, restorative. And there is something even deeper in Psalm 46. When we read a very present help in trouble, we realize that God's promise isn't just about protection or strength, it's about closeness. He is here. Not distant, not delayed, but right by your side. He's not like a friend who shows up only after the storm has passed. He is the one holding your hand in the eye of the hurricane, helping you stand firm as everything around you is torn apart. The phrase very present carries the idea of urgency, of help that arrives even before you realize you need it. Think about that. The creator of the universe, the one who holds galaxies in place, is right there with you at the exact moment you call on him, or even before you find the strength to do so. Why does this psalm resonate so deeply? Perhaps it's because it doesn't ignore the chaos. It doesn't pretend life is easy or that challenges don't exist. Instead, it acknowledges the storms, the earthquakes, and the floods that threaten to overwhelm us. It invites us to face them, but with one crucial difference, with the certainty that we are not alone. God doesn't promise a life free of problems, but He does promise His presence in the midst of them. Think about moments in your life when everything seemed lost. Maybe you faced a crisis that felt insurmountable, a loss, a disappointment, an internal battle. Do you remember the feeling of having nowhere to turn? Now imagine how different it might have been if you had the unshakable certainty that God was right there with you, offering refuge, strength, and presence. That is what Psalm 46 offers. Not an escape from reality, but the strength to face it with renewed courage. There is also a powerful connection between that strength and the trust that comes from knowing God's character. When we trust that He is who He says He is, the refuge, the fortress, the present help, something changes within us. Our circumstances may not shift immediately, but our perspective does. Instead of focusing on the storm, our eyes turn to the shelter. Instead of being consumed by fear, we are renewed by the strength that flows from Him. What makes this promise even more profound is that it isn't conditional. God doesn't require you to be at your best without doubts or weaknesses to offer His refuge. He meets you exactly where you are, in your vulnerability, in the middle of your struggle. Imagine a child lost in a crowd, crying in fear. The parent doesn't wait for the child to stop crying or find their own way before stepping in. They go to the child, scoop them up, and bring them to safety. That is God's heart for you. Starting from Psalm 46, verse 1, we see that the journey is not about finding refuge in temporary things, but about discovering an eternal and unshakable place in God. No matter how fierce the storms, how strong the winds, or how intense the waves, you are safe. That is the Psalm's invitation, to trust, to rest, and to find strength in the God who never fails. Now imagine for a moment what it means to live without fear. Not just the kind of bravery we muster in moments of adrenaline, but a deep and unshakable confidence that remains even when the ground seems to crumble beneath our feet. Psalm 46 doesn't invite us to pretend that danger doesn't exist, but challenges us to a faith so firm that fear loses its grip on us. When we read the verses, therefore we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling, we are transported to a scene of absolute chaos, but also to an inexplicable confidence amidst the storm. The psalmist doesn't use soft or comforting images to illustrate life's challenges. He speaks of a collapsing world, a scene where even mountains, symbols of strength and stability, are cast into the sea. It's a vision of devastation, something that would naturally trigger fear in anyone. Who wouldn't feel small and powerless in the face of such destructive force? Yet the declaration is clear. Therefore, we will not fear. This courage, however, doesn't come from human strength or an attitude of denial. It is born from understanding who God is. He is the refuge and fortress mentioned at the beginning of the psalm, the source of security that cannot be shaken, even when everything around us collapses. It is a supernatural confidence that allows us to stand firm even when the waters roar and the mountains tremble. Now think about the waters described here. They are not calm, they are chaotic, threatening, overwhelming. The roaring waters symbolize not just the forces of nature, but also life's circumstances that challenge and destabilize us. Whether it's an unexpected piece of news, a devastating loss, or the crushing weight of anxiety, we've all faced moments when the waters roared in our lives. In those moments, it's tempting to be swept away by the current, losing control and succumbing to fear. But the psalm invites us to take a different stance. It calls us to remember that the same God who created the waters also controls them. Consider the contrast. While the waters symbolize chaos, God represents stability. He is the creator of the trembling mountains, the master of the roaring waters. He is not a distant observer, but an active, present God who intervenes in the middle of the crisis. This certainty that he is in control completely changes how we face difficulties. It doesn't mean the challenges disappear, but our perspective shifts. What once seemed insurmountable is now seen in the light of God's sovereignty. Picture someone facing an overwhelming crisis, perhaps a financial collapse, the end of a relationship, or a frightening diagnosis. This person feels like the world is literally crumbling around them, like the mountains falling into the sea described by the psalmist. But then they remember the words, "Therefore, we will not fear." Not because the crisis is smaller than it seems, but because God is greater. This certainty doesn't eliminate the problem, but it provides the strength needed to face it. That confidence doesn't come out of nowhere. It's the result of knowing God and deeply connecting with his promises. In Isaiah 41:10, we hear an echo of this truth. "Do not fear, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed, for I am your God. I will strengthen you and help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand." This passage complements what Psalm 46 teaches us. God's presence doesn't just comfort us, it strengthens us. And what about the mountains cast into the heart of the sea? These mountains often represent our certainties, the foundations of our lives, jobs, relationships, health, financial stability. When those foundations are shaken, it's easy to feel like we're losing control. Yet the psalm reminds us that even when those things disappear, God remains unshakable. He is the solid rock upon which we can build our lives, even when everything around us seems to be in ruins. The psalmist doesn't invite us to deny the reality of chaos, but to face it head-on with the confidence that God is present and active. Just as Jesus calmed the storm on the Sea of Galilee, he still has power over the storms in our lives. When the terrified disciples cried out for help, Jesus didn't just rebuke the wind and waves, he also challenged their lack of faith. "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Mark 4:40. That question echoes for us today. Why do we let fear dominate us when we have the promise that God is with us? What would happen if we adopted this perspective in our daily lives? Imagine living with the confidence that no matter what happens around us, God is in control. This doesn't mean we won't feel fear or sadness, but it means we are not defined by those emotions. Instead, we choose to trust the promise that the God who upholds the mountains and the seas also upholds us. Think about the moments in your life when everything felt like it was falling apart. Where did you find strength? Where did you find security? Psalm 46 challenges us to place our trust in God, not in circumstances, not in our own resources or abilities, but in the God who is our refuge and fortress. At the heart of Psalm 46, a surprisingly serene image emerges in contrast to the earlier chaos. The verses say, "There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy dwelling place of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her at the break of dawn." After trembling mountains and roaring seas, we find the calm of a tranquil river, a symbol of life, renewal, and stability. This river is no ordinary body of water. It is the presence of God flowing through his city, sustaining and gladdening the hearts of his people. Take a moment to reflect on the difference between a river and the stormy sea described in the earlier verses. While the sea is unpredictable, tumultuous, and threatening, the river is steady, gentle, and vital. It flows peacefully, bringing renewal wherever it goes. It's this serenity that the psalmist presents to us now, inviting us to experience the peace that can only be found in God's presence. No matter how fierce the external storms, there is an inner river that can bring calm and joy to our souls. But what does this river mean in practice? Throughout Scripture, rivers often symbolize God's presence and his Holy Spirit. In Eden, a river flowed to sustain life in the garden. Genesis 2, verse 10. In Ezekiel 47, the prophet has a vision of a river flowing from the temple, bringing life and healing wherever it goes. And in Revelation 22, we find the river of the water of life flowing from the throne of God and the Lamb, a picture of eternal restoration. The river in Psalm 46 carries the same message. God's presence is a source of life that sustains and renews his people. The city of God mentioned here is not just Jerusalem, but also represents God's people, those who live under his protection and guidance. When the psalmist declares that God is in her midst and that she will not be moved, he shows us that true security does not come from walls or armies, but from God's presence. He is the center, the strength, and the stability of his people. Imagine for a moment what it means to have God in the midst of your life as he is in the midst of his city. It doesn't mean you will be immune to difficulties, but it does mean that even in the greatest storms, there is a presence that sustains and strengthens you. It's like a firm pillar in the middle of an earthquake. While everything around shakes, that pillar remains unshakable, holding everything in place. And then the psalmist gives us a powerful image. God will help her at the break of dawn. There is something profoundly comforting about this promise. The night, with all its uncertainties and fears, does not last forever. The morning will come, and with it, God's help. This promise not only reminds us that God's help is certain, but that it comes at the exact moment we need it most. Dawn symbolizes renewal, a fresh start. Even in the darkest moments, we can be assured that God will bring his light and his help in his perfect timing. Think about what this means for your life. We all face dark nights, moments when hope feels distant, when worries surround us, and when the light seems to have disappeared. But Psalm 46 reminds us of something crucial. God is present, even in the darkness. And when the morning comes, his help becomes evident, bringing renewal and joy. This promise is echoed in other parts of Scripture. Remember Lamentations 3:22-23. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. With each new day, God offers a renewal of his grace, strength, and presence. It is proof that he never leaves us, even when we face the longest nights. But how can we experience this river of peace and renewal in our lives? The psalm invites us to seek God's presence intentionally. Just as a river needs a channel to flow, we must make room in our hearts and lives for God's presence to reach us. This might mean setting aside time in silence before him, meditating on his word, or calling out to him in prayer. It is in his presence that we find refreshment for our weary souls. Imagine a woman facing a season of exhaustion and despair. She feels like she's at her limit, as if she's carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders. One day, she opens her Bible and finds Psalm 46. When she reads about the river that makes the city of God glad, something begins to shift. She realizes that despite the chaos around her, there is a source of peace she can access. She starts spending moments in prayer and meditation, seeking God's presence. Gradually, like a river that renews dry banks, she feels her soul being restored. What does this river represent for you? Perhaps you feel worn out by life's demands, tired of fighting against the endless waves of worries and challenges. Psalm 46 reminds us that there is a source of renewal and joy available to all of us, not in something external, but in the presence of God dwelling among us. This presence not only renews us, but anchors us, ensuring that even when everything around us moves, we will not be shaken. As we continue to explore Psalm 46, we are confronted with a dramatic shift in tone. From the calm rivers and the joy in God's city, we move to a scene of global turmoil. The verses declare, "The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. The Lord of hosts is with us, the God of Jacob is our fortress." Here the psalmist transports us to a cosmic scale, where God's sovereignty contrasts with the fragility of nations and earthly kingdoms. Imagine the nations raging like a stormy sea filled with ambition, conflict, and chaos. This scene is not hard to picture. Just look around. Daily headlines echo the psalmist's words: wars, political crises, disasters, and relentless disputes. We live in a world that always seems on the brink of collapse. But while the nations roar and kingdoms crumble, there's a voice that rises above all the tumult. It is the voice of God, and when it is spoken, the earth melts. This image is as powerful as it is unsettling. God's voice is not just a creative force, as seen in Genesis, but also a sovereign power that silences all rebellion and chaos. When he speaks, forces that seemed uncontrollable dissipate like mist in the morning sun. What once appeared immense and insurmountable disappears before his authority. This is the God the psalmist presents to us, the Lord who doesn't just observe from afar, but acts, intervenes, and puts an end to all turmoil. Consider what this means for our lives. How often are we consumed by the turmoil around us? The news, economic uncertainties, personal conflicts, all these can make us feel as though we are being swept away by a current we cannot control. But the psalmist calls us to remember that there is one who is above it all. God's voice doesn't just calm the seas, it redefines what is possible. And then the psalm offers us an extraordinary declaration. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. Here, the title Lord of Hosts introduces God as a celestial military leader, the commander of angelic armies. He is not just powerful, he is all-powerful. He is not only a God of peace, he is also a God of war who fights for those who trust in him. Yet at the same time, he is described as the God of Jacob. This title reminds us of his closeness, his intimate relationship with his people. Who was Jacob? He was far from perfect. Jacob was a flawed man who deceived his brother, ran from his responsibilities, and wrestled with God. Yet God chose him, walked with him, and transformed him into Israel, the father of a nation. When the psalmist tells us that the God of Jacob is our fortress, he reminds us that God is not limited by our imperfections. He is the God who engages with our struggles, our failures, our fears. He is the God who takes what is broken and transforms it. Imagine the power of this combination. The Lord of hosts, with the entire universe under his command, is also the God who knows you by name, who understands your pain, and who walks with you through your darkest nights. He is not a distant God. He is a refuge, a place where you can run, where you can find safety and rest no matter the chaos that surrounds you. Think about how this applies to the struggles we face every day. Perhaps you're dealing with a conflict that feels too big for you, something completely out of your control. Or maybe you're carrying the weight of past mistakes, feeling unworthy of God's help. Psalm 46 reminds us that God is present, that he is both powerful and personal. He isn't just aware of your struggles, he is by your side, fighting for you. Remember the story of Moses and the Red Sea. When the Israelites were trapped between Pharaoh's army and the sea, fear took hold of them. But with a single command, God parted the sea, transforming an impossible situation into a pathway to freedom. This is the same God the psalmist presents to us here, the God who turns chaos into order, who transforms despair into hope. And this leads us to reflect, where do we need to hear God's voice today? What areas in our lives have nations raging and kingdoms trembling? Perhaps it's external circumstances, like financial uncertainty or strained relationships. Or maybe it's internal storms, doubts, fears, anxieties that consume us. Psalm 46 invites us to surrender these areas to the Lord of hosts, trusting that his voice is still powerful enough to bring peace and order. The central question is, do we trust that God is with us? This is the promise the psalmist declares with such certainty. No matter how chaotic the world becomes, the Lord of hosts is not just observing, he is with us. And more than that, he is our refuge. Not a temporary refuge, but an eternal one, where we can find rest and safety even in life's greatest storms. As we continue through Psalm 46, we are invited to behold the absolute power of God in action. The verses now proclaim, "Come and see the works of the Lord, the desolations he has brought on the earth. He makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire." These words are a powerful call to witness the greatness of God, not just as creator, but as one who intervenes decisively in human history. It is an invitation to set aside our immediate concerns and observe God's sovereignty on a global scale. Imagine being invited to pause everything, step away from the rush of daily life, and simply look at what God has done. It's as if the psalmist is saying, stop worrying for a moment and see who God really is. This invitation is not passive. It's a command that demands our attention. Come and see the works of the Lord challenges us to look beyond the immediate chaos and recognize the divine pattern of intervention throughout history. He is the God who turns seemingly endless battles into lasting peace. The phrase, "the desolations he has brought on the earth," might initially sound negative, but it carries a much deeper meaning. These desolations are not random acts of destruction. They are manifestations of divine justice, moments when God intervenes to put an end to evil and establish his order. Think of biblical stories like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah or the plagues on Egypt during the Exodus. In each of these situations, God was not acting on a whim, but executing justice, liberating the oppressed, and reaffirming his power. And then comes the central declaration: he makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. In a world marked by endless conflict, this is a promise that defies human logic. Wars seem like an inevitable constant, an inescapable part of humanity. But the psalmist reminds us that God is greater than our divisions, greater than our disputes. He doesn't just pause wars, he ends them completely. Imagine a battlefield where the sound of swords and cries is replaced by the absolute silence of peace. This isn't superficial peace, but a profound transformation where the instruments of war are destroyed. The bow is broken, the spear is shattered, the chariots are burned. This image of God as an active peacemaker presents a fascinating contrast. He is the Lord of hosts, a powerful warrior, but his ultimate goal is not war. It is peace. He fights not to destroy indiscriminately, but to eliminate the tools and systems that perpetuate conflict. When he breaks the bow and burns the chariots, he is declaring that these instruments of violence will have no place in his kingdom. His peace is not achieved through human strength, but through his divine authority. And how does this apply to our lives? How many internal and external wars do we carry? How many conflicts, anxieties, and disputes occupy our minds and hearts? All of us at some level face battles that feel endless, struggles with relationships, insecurities, fears, or even our purpose in life. This passage of the psalm invites us to surrender these battles to the only one who can truly end them. Think about the story of Gideon described in the book of Judges. When called by God to lead Israel against the Midianites, Gideon felt inadequate, weak, incapable of facing such a massive army. But God, in his sovereignty, reduced Gideon's army to just 300 men. Why? To make it clear that victory would not come from human strength, but from divine intervention. And when victory came, it was complete. There was no doubt that God was in control. Similarly, the wars in our lives will not be won by our strength, but by the action of the God who makes wars cease to the ends of the earth. There's also a personal aspect to this promise. When we think about the bows and spears mentioned, we can imagine not just physical tools of war, but also the weapons we use in our own battles. It could be pride, self-protection, the need for control, or the relentless pursuit of approval. God doesn't just invite us to hand over our battles to him. He challenges us to lay down the weapons we use to fight our own wars. He calls us to trust that his way is better, that his peace is more powerful than anything we could achieve on our own. Now consider the phrase, "Come and see the works of the Lord." How often in our lives are we so consumed by the battles we face that we forget to look at what God has already done? We forget the victories He has given us, the miracles He has performed, the ways He has shown His faithfulness. This call to behold is a reminder that when we focus on God's works, our perspective shifts. Suddenly, the chaos feels smaller and God's peace feels closer. There's an even deeper dimension to this vision of God as the one who makes wars cease. He's not just ending external conflicts, He's bringing peace to the human heart. Imagine someone tormented for years by resentment and anger, constantly battling others and themselves. When this person finally surrenders to God's presence, something changes. The bow is broken, the spear is cut, and a peace that once seemed impossible takes over. That's the transformation God offers, not just on a global scale, but in our individual lives. As we reflect on these words, we are challenged to surrender our battles to God, to trust that He is capable of bringing a peace that surpasses all understanding. Whatever battle you're facing, internal or external, the psalm reminds us that there is a God who is in control, who fights for us, and who in the end will bring a peace that nothing in this world can offer. As Psalm 46 continues to reveal God's majesty and sovereignty, we arrive at one of the most profound and transformative verses in the passage. "Be still, and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." These words are a direct summons, almost like a divine command that cuts through the noise of our lives and calls us to stop, to listen, and to recognize who God truly is. The phrase, "be still," is more than an invitation to silence. In the original Hebrew, the idea behind this word is to cease or let go. God is telling us to release control, to stop fighting against circumstances, and to abandon the constant need to fix everything with our own strength. It's as if He's saying, let go of your anxiety, your worry, your attempt to hold the reins of your life, and trust that I am God. This is a call to surrender, something profoundly challenging in a society that teaches us to value control and self-reliance above all else. Now, think about this in a more personal context. Imagine being in the middle of a literal storm, strong winds, deafening thunder, violent waves. The natural human instinct is to do something, anything, to try to survive. But in the midst of the chaos comes this voice that says, "Be still." It's not easy to obey that command, especially when everything within you is screaming for action. And yet, that's exactly what God asks of us. He invites us to stop, not because the storm will magically disappear, but because He is present and in control, even when everything seems out of order. The second part of the verse, "and know that I am God," is equally transformative. It's not just an invitation to intellectual understanding, but to a deep and experiential recognition. To know that He is God means to trust in His character, His promises, and His power. It's to acknowledge that He is sovereign, that His hands sustain the universe, and that nothing, absolutely nothing, is beyond His control. It's a declaration of faith that challenges us to set aside our doubts and fears and rest in the certainty of who He is. Think about the story of Moses and the Israelites at the Red Sea. With Pharaoh's army quickly approaching and an impassable sea ahead, panic set in among the people. But Moses' words echo the command of Psalm 46. "The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Exodus 14, verse 14. It was in that moment of complete dependence on God that the miracle happened. The waters parted and a way was made where there was no way. That's the power of knowing that He is God, the confidence that He can do the impossible. The final part of the verse expands the vision even further. "I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth." This is a declaration of the ultimate destiny of all creation, the glorification of God. It's a reminder that regardless of current circumstances, God is guiding history toward a culmination where His glory will be fully revealed. Kingdoms may shake, nations may rage, but in the end, God will be exalted above all. And this has profound implications for how we live. When we are called to be still and know that He is God, we are being invited to see our struggles in the light of His eternity. No matter how big the problem we face, it is small compared to the God who is above all things. He doesn't just see the bigger picture, He controls it. And when we understand this, we can let go of our fears and find rest in His sovereignty. Consider what it means in practice to be still and know that He is God. Maybe you're facing a tough decision, a strained relationship, or a moment of deep uncertainty. The world around us tells us to act, to take control, to find a solution quickly. But God calls us to do something radically different, to stop. It's not easy, but it's powerful, to stop and seek His presence, to stop and listen to His voice, to stop and remember who He is. Now imagine how this manifests in someone's life. Picture a person struggling with paralyzing anxiety. They are constantly worried about the future, trying to predict and control every detail. But in a moment of desperation, they decide to stop and open their Bible. As they read Psalm 46:10, something begins to change. They change. They sense God saying, "You don't have to carry this alone. I am God. I am in control." Over time, they begin to practice this truth, setting aside moments of silence to hand their fears over to God and remind themselves that He is greater than their circumstances. Gradually, they discover a peace that once seemed impossible. This is the beauty of God's invitation. He isn't asking us to trust blindly, but to rely on His faithfulness, His history, and His continuous presence in our lives. When we can be still and recognize that He is God, we are freed from the burden of trying to solve everything on our own. We discover that even in the midst of storms, we can rest because we are in the hands of a God who not only sees our suffering, but has the power to redeem every situation. And so this verse becomes not just a call to stillness, but to worship. To know that He is God is to acknowledge that He is worthy of our trust, our praise, and our complete dependence. It is an invitation to step away from the chaos and into the peace of His presence. And when we do this, we experience a transformation beyond our understanding. The storm may continue, but within us there is a calm that can only come from God. As we move forward in Psalm 46, God's greatness and active presence become increasingly evident. We reach a point where the promise of divine protection takes on a deeply personal and transformative tone. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. This powerful declaration is not just the psalmist's conclusion, but an echo of everything revealed so far. A reminder that even in the most overwhelming chaos, God's presence is constant and sufficient. The title Lord of Hosts brings to mind an image of unparalleled strength. Here, God is described as a supreme commander, leading legions of angels, reigning over all visible and invisible forces. He is not only the creator of the universe, but the sustainer of all things. When we think of armies, we imagine strength, protection, and readiness for battle. The psalmist is telling us that this same God, the Lord of hosts, is with us, not just symbolically, but in a real, tangible, and profoundly present way. Now consider this on a personal level. Imagine facing a massive struggle, whether it's a health crisis, an emotional battle, or an overwhelming uncertainty about the future. In that moment, Psalm 46 reminds us that the God who commands heavenly armies is also by your side. He is not distant, nor watching from afar. He is present in the midst of your fight as a safe refuge and constant strength. This truth changes everything. No matter how great the challenge before you, you are not facing it alone. But the psalmist doesn't stop there. He also reminds us that this God is the God of Jacob. This title brings out a more intimate and relational dimension of God. Jacob was a deeply flawed man who lied, deceived, and wrestled with God. And yet, God remained faithful to him. God didn't just transform Jacob into Israel, but He also established an eternal covenant with him and his descendants. By calling God the God of Jacob, the psalmist reminds us that God is not just grand and powerful. He is also merciful, near, and deeply involved with His people, even in their weaknesses. This combination is extraordinary. The Lord of hosts, who commands the heavens and the earth, is also the God who knows your deepest struggles. He is not only a God of victory, He is a God of relationship. He understands your fears, your doubts, and your pain. He walks with you every step of the way, offering not just protection, but also comfort and unconditional love. Imagine, for a moment, what it would be like to live fully aware of this truth. Think about how your perspective would shift as you face challenges, knowing that the God of Jacob, who was faithful to an imperfect man, is also faithful to you. He is the same God who was with Moses in the wilderness, with David on the battlefield, with Elijah in the cave, and he is with you now. This is the essence of his promise. The Lord of hosts is with us. And what does it mean for God to be our refuge? It's not just a place of protection, but also a space where we are renewed. A refuge is where we find rest, where we regain our strength, where we set aside our fears and remember who we truly are in light of who God is. When the psalmist declares that the God of Jacob is our refuge, he is inviting us to run to God in our moments of greatest need. He is calling us to abandon the idea that we can face everything alone and to trust in the God who protects and strengthens us. Think about it. How often do we try to carry the weight of our battles alone? How often do we attempt to build our own refuges, whether through relationships, financial resources, or even our own pride, only to find that they are not enough to shield us from life's chaos? The psalm reminds us that there is a greater refuge, a place of safety that never fails. That refuge is God. Consider the depth of this promise. The Lord of hosts is with us. God is not just near us when things are calm or when we feel worthy of his presence. He is with us at all times, in the good days and the bad, in victories and defeats, in moments of strength and times of weakness. He is the God who never abandons us, even when we feel abandoned. He is the God who fights for us, even when we have no strength to fight for ourselves. This truth is powerfully exemplified in the story of Daniel and his friends, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, thrown into the fiery furnace. When they were cast into the flames, they were not alone. There was a fourth figure with them, a visible reflection of God's presence. They were protected not because the fire was extinguished, but because God was with them in the midst of the flames. That is the promise of Psalm 46. Even in the most intense fire, God is present. He is the refuge that sustains us. Now think about your own life. Where do you need to be reminded of this truth? Perhaps there's an area where you feel overwhelmed, as though you're facing chaos alone. Psalm 46 invites us to pause and recognize that the Lord of hosts is with us. He is here now, offering protection, strength, and peace. And he's not just beside us. He is the refuge we can turn to at any moment, in any circumstance. This is the essence of Psalm 46, a God who is both majestic and close, powerful and merciful, the Lord of hosts and the God of Jacob. He doesn't just fight our battles. He also offers us a safe place where we can rest, renew our strength, and find hope to move forward. Psalm 46 culminates in a powerful and transformative declaration. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our refuge. These final words echo like a refrain, a repeated reminder to embed in our hearts the unshakable reality that God is both our protector and our constant companion. But this psalm, like our journey through life, is not merely an invitation to reflect. It is a call to transformation, to action, and above all, to trust. The message of Psalm 46 goes beyond poetry or comfort. It is a declaration of war against fear, against chaos, and against anything that threatens to separate us from God's presence. It challenges us to leave behind our earthly worries, our failed attempts to control the uncontrollable, and to fully surrender to God's sovereignty. In doing so, we are invited to live in a state of peace and confidence that transcends any circumstance. Now, look at your own life. Where do you need this truth? Perhaps you are facing a season of loss, a difficult decision, or a challenge that seems impossible to overcome. Perhaps you feel alone, as though the waves of life are about to consume you. Psalm 46 offers more than comforting words. It offers a living promise, an invitation to find refuge and strength in the God who never fails. Imagine the impact of living with the full awareness that the Lord of hosts is with you. This doesn't mean that life's storms will vanish, but it does mean you have a safe anchor in the midst of them. It means that even when the mountains tremble and the seas roar, you can stand firm, knowing you are in the hands of a God who is greater than any adversity. Now, think about how many people around you need this same message. Friends, family, coworkers, everyone faces their own battles, often in silence. Sharing the hope found in Psalm 46 is not just an act of kindness, but an opportunity to be a vessel through which others experience God's peace and strength. By spreading this message, you not only inspire others to find refuge in God, but also strengthen your own faith as you see how this truth can transform lives. This is where the purpose of the Eternal Compass comes in. Our mission is to guide you and others on a journey of spiritual discovery, exploring eternal truths that have the power to transform lives. If this message has touched your heart, share it. Send this video to someone facing a difficult time. You may never know the impact it could have, but God does, and He can use every word to bring comfort and renewal. We also want to hear from you. In the comments below, share your reflections on Psalm 46. Is there a specific area in your life where you need to be still and trust that God is in control? Have you experienced a time when God acted as your refuge? Your story could be the inspiration someone else needs to keep believing. And before we wrap up, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Here at the Eternal Compass, we are committed to bringing you more messages like this one, exploring the Bible, history, and God's promises in a way that is vibrant, practical, and inspiring. Click the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any content. By joining our community, you not only receive, but also become part of a greater mission to spread hope and truth. Finally, take this truth with you. The God who makes wars cease, who calms the waters, and who turns chaos into order is the same God who is with you today. He does not change, His strength does not diminish, and His presence never leaves. Whatever your journey may be, you are never alone. The Lord of hosts is with you. The God of Jacob is your refuge. Now, go and live with that confidence. Let the truth of Psalm 46 transform your perspective, strengthen your faith, and inspire you to face each day with renewed courage. May God bless you, and we'll see you in the next video.